Welcome to the Depthcast, where we explore the most chilling urban legends and supernatural tales from around the world. I'm Echo, your voice from the shadows, and tonight, we crawl into one of Japan's most chilling tales. This is the legend of Teke Teke, a woman torn in half, dragging her body with raw, bloodied elbows, and she's faster than you think. Before we begin, I should warn you, this episode contains graphic descriptions that some listeners might find disturbing, and perhaps it's best not to listen while walking alone near train stations after dark. You never know what might be lurking in the shadows, making that distinctive sound. Tick tick, tick tick. Tonight, we'll explore the origins of this horrifying ghost, share bone-chilling encounters with the entity, analyze what this legend tells us about Japanese culture and our own fears, and examine how Teke Teke has infiltrated modern media. So lock your doors, turn on the lights, and join me as we unravel the mystery of the woman cut in half who seeks revenge on the living. Like many urban legends, the tale of Teke Teke has several variations, but the core elements remain the same. Teke Teke is the vengeful spirit of a young woman or schoolgirl whose body was severed in half by a train. She appears as the upper half of a human body, dragging herself along on her hands or elbows, creating the distinctive tick tick sound that gives her name. Most accounts describe her as having long, black hair, typical of Japanese ghost stories. Some versions claim she has claws instead of fingernails or fingers, which help her drag her torn body across the ground. What remains of her torso is said to be a gruesome sight, raw and bloody, with spine and internal organs, sometimes visible where her lower half should be. Despite her seemingly limited mobility, Teke Teke is said to move with terrifying speed. Some accounts claim she can travel at up to 150 kilometers per hour, making escape nearly impossible once she sets her sights on a victim. And if she catches you, the outcome is always the same. She carries a scythe or similar cutting implement, which she uses to slice her victims in half at the waist, mirroring her own tragic fate. The most widely told origin story is that Teke Teke was once a schoolgirl who fell onto railway tracks and was cut in half by an oncoming train. In her final moments, as she lay dying, station attendants who discovered her simply covered her with a plastic tarp, rather than trying to help her. She died a slow, agonizing death, her intense emotions of suffering and betrayal binding her spirit to this world as an onryo, a vengeful Japanese ghost. However, other versions exist. One particularly detailed account identifies her as a woman named Kashima Reiko, who lived in Hokkaido during the post-World War II era. According to this telling, Kashima was an office worker who was assaulted by military personnel. She was left injured on railway tracks where a train severed her body in half. Despite the severity of her injuries, the cold Hokkaido night caused her blood vessels to contract, preventing her from bleeding out quickly. For several agonizing minutes, she squirmed and crawled, desperately seeking help. When a station attendant finally discovered her, instead of offering assistance, he merely covered her with plastic and left her to die a slow, painful death. Yet another version suggests she was a victim of bullying, tied to railway tracks by her tormentors as a cruel prank. And some accounts simply state that she committed suicide by throwing herself in front of a train. Whatever her origin, one thing remains consistent across all versions of the legend. Teke Teke is eternally filled with rage and resentment, seeking to inflict her fate on others. She typically appears at night near train stations or urban areas, waiting for lone travelers who have the misfortune of crossing her path. Now that we understand who or what Teke Teke is, Let's explore some of the most frightening encounters with this vengeful spirit that have been reported across Japan. Our first account comes from the siblings Kai and Mina, who claim to have a terrifying encounter with Teke Teke while returning to their apartment one night. As we approached our apartment, the once distant sound of Teke Teke seemed to grow louder in Mina's ears. She hesitated at the building entrance, glancing around the dimly lit street. The weight of the legend seemed to suffocate the air around her. Kai, not noticing her hesitation, fumbled with his keys. "You know," he began, pushing the heavy door open. "These stories have a funny way of getting into your head, especially on nights like this." As they entered the elevator, Mina thought she heard that soft echo of Teke Teke again. They tried to dismiss it as their imagination, but later that night, the siblings heard a dragging sound in the hallway outside their apartment. The sound stopped right at their door. Terrified, they fled through their apartment and eventually found themselves in an old storage room, where they locked the door behind them. Pressing their ears against the door, they listened intently. The dragging and tapping grew louder, stopping just outside. Frozen in place, they held their breath, praying that whatever was outside would move on. But then, an eerie voice whispered, almost in a sing-song manner, "Teke Teke." According to their account, they remained hidden for hours until morning, when they found strange scratch marks on the outside of the storage room door. Another encounter reportedly took place at a boys' school in Japan. A student was leaving late after an extracurricular activity when he noticed a girl sitting by a window on the second floor, her arms leaning on the windowsill. It was strange seeing a girl there, since his was an all-boys school. She noticed him looking at her and smiled. He smiled back, confused but intrigued. Then, without warning, she jumped from the window. The boy froze in shock, expecting to hear the sound of her body hitting the ground. Instead, he heard a different sound, the distinctive Teke Teke approaching rapidly. When she landed, he realized with horror that she had no legs. The upper body he had seen at the window was all she had. Before he could run, she pulled out a large scythe, her eyes fixed on him. The boy claimed he managed to escape, but not before glimpsing her inhuman speed as she pursued him, dragging herself on her elbows with that distinctive Teke Teke sound. The next day, his classmates found his body cut in half at the waist. In one documented encounter from the film Teke Teke, a woman named Hiromi Shimizu walked home at night, taking a path along an overpass near a train station. She felt a sudden wind and heard a scuttling sound before being chased by an unseen, fast-moving entity. She managed to hide temporarily and overheard children discussing the urban legend nearby. But as she stepped back onto the road, believing herself safe, the wind picked up again, and the entity sliced her in half at the waist. This pattern of victims hearing about the legend shortly before encountering Teke Teke themselves is common in many accounts, suggesting that merely knowing about the ghost might summon her. This pattern of victims hearing about the legend shortly before encountering Teke Teke themselves is common in many accounts, suggesting that merely knowing about the ghost might summon her. To understand Teke Teke, we must first understand the Japanese concept of einan, yanyan, the idea that emotions can be so powerful that they extend beyond death. This concept is central to many Japanese ghost stories, particularly those involving vengeful spirits known as onryu. The underlying concept behind Japanese irei is einan, the idea that some emotions are so strong that their power can extend from beyond the grave. Almost all classic and contemporary ghost stories from Japan operate on this principle. The intense emotional state at the time of death binds the spirit to this world, focused entirely on expressing those emotions through vengeance. This explains why Teke Teke returns as a vengeful spirit. Her death was not only violent and tragic, but was made worse by the neglect she experienced in her final moments. Instead of receiving help, she was covered with a tarp and left to die alone in agony. Urban legends often reflect societal anxieties and fears. The Teke Teke legend, with its connection to trains and railway tracks, emerged during Japan's periods of rapid urbanization and industrialization, as people moved from rural areas to cities and relied increasingly on railway transportation. New fears developed around these modern conveniences. The legend serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of urban life and technology. Some scholars suggest that Teke Teke may also function as a metaphor for bullying and social neglect. Many versions of the legend emphasize that she was either bullied directly, leading to her death, or that she was ignored and abandoned when she needed help most. In a society that places high value on social harmony and conformity, the tale of Teke Teke serves as a stark warning about the consequences of mistreating others. From a psychological perspective, Teke Teke represents our fear of dismemberment and bodily harm. Her appearance, missing the lower half of her body, taps into primal fears about bodily integrity. Additionally, the way she mirrors her fate onto her victims, cutting them in half as she was cut, reflects a deep human anxiety about cyclical violence and trauma being passed from one person to another. There's also a geographical component to the legend. Japan is a country prone to natural disasters, including earthquakes that can cause tragic accidents, train accidents, while rare in modern Japan's highly efficient railway system, have occurred throughout history. The Teke Teke legend may partly be a cultural processing of these traumatic events. What makes Teke Teke particularly effective as an urban legend is the way it incorporates elements of truth with supernatural horror. Train accidents do happen. People do sometimes ignore those in need. These real-world anxieties are then amplified and transformed into a supernatural narrative that helps people process their fears, while also serving as a moral cautionary tale. Far from fading into obscurity, the legend of Teke Teke has thrived in the modern era, finding new life in films, anime, manga, and digital media. In 2009, director Koji Shiraishi brought Teke Teke to the big screen with his supernatural horror film Teke Teke. The film follows a high school student named Kana, who investigates a series of mysterious deaths where victims are cut in half. The film, while operating on a modest budget, received mixed reviews from critics and was successful enough to spawn a sequel. Teke Teke Dua released the same year. The film adaptation adds its own twist to the legend, developing the character of Kashima Rako as a nurse who committed suicide after being raped by an American soldier in 1948. In this version, the ghost develops an aversion to the color red, which becomes a key plot element in the film. Teke Teke has also made appearances in anime. In the first episode of the series Ghost Stories, the main characters are chased by a Teke Teke, introducing this urban legend to audiences outside Japan. Video games have embraced the legend as well. Teke Teke Moonlit Dread is an indie horror game where players encounter the legend firsthand after reading about it online, blurring the lines between fiction and reality in a meta-narrative that mirrors how many people actually discover the legend. The digital age has provided new avenues for the Teke Teke legend to spread and evolve. Japanese internet forums like 2chan, similar to 4chan in the West, have become breeding grounds for urban legends, allowing users to share their own encounters with Teke Teke and create new variations of the story. What's particularly interesting about Teke Teke and similar Japanese urban legends is how they've become global phenomena. While distinctly Japanese in origin, these stories have found receptive audiences worldwide, particularly through horror tourism and media like The Ring and The Grudge, which were adapted from Japanese originals and helped popularize Japanese horror tropes internationally. Japanese urban legends like Teke Teke have universal appeal because they tap into primal fears, while offering a unique cultural perspective. The aesthetics of Japanese horror, with its emphasis on psychological terror, vengeful spirits, and often ambiguous endings, provides a refreshing alternative to Western horror traditions. This has made Japanese urban legends particularly viral in the internet age. The legend has also become intertwined with other famous Japanese urban legends, such as Hanako-san, who haunts school toilets, and Kuchisakana, the slit-mouthed woman. Together, these stories form a tapestry of supernatural beliefs that continue to evolve while maintaining connections to traditional Japanese ghost folklore. Hanako-san, like Teke Teke, is the ghost of a young girl who died tragically and now haunts a specific location. In her case, school bathrooms rather than train stations. Kuchisakana similarly approaches victims with a question, "Am I beautiful?" before attacking them, much as some versions of Teke Teke ask about her missing legs. These connections highlight how Japanese urban legends often share common themes of tragic death, specific questions that must be answered correctly, and the consequences of modern life in an increasingly urbanized society. As we've explored, Teke Teke is far more than just a ghost story told to frighten children. This urban legend reflects deep cultural beliefs about death, revenge, and the power of human emotion. It serves as a cautionary tale about the consequences of cruelty and neglect while tapping into universal fears about bodily harm and violent death. Despite living in an age of science and technology, urban legends like Teke Teke continue to thrive. In fact, the digital age has given them new life, allowing variations to spread rapidly through social media, forums, and messaging apps. Each retelling adds new details, keeping the legend fresh and relevant for new generations. Beyond entertainment, the Teke Teke legend continues to serve important social functions. In Japan, such stories are often used to discourage dangerous behavior, particularly among children and teenagers. Parents might warn their children not to play near train tracks by invoking Teke Teke, or teachers might use the legend to discourage bullying by emphasizing versions of the story where Teke Teke was a bullying victim. Perhaps what makes Teke Teke and similar urban legends so enduring is their ambiguity. We're never quite sure if they're entirely fictional or contain kernels of truth. After all, tragic accidents do happen on railway tracks. People in need are sometimes ignored. And in those dark moments between consciousness and sleep, who hasn't heard strange sounds that couldn't quite be explained? The legend of Teke Teke, with its variations and adaptations, demonstrates how ghost stories evolve to address contemporary fears, while maintaining connections to traditional cultural beliefs. In a rapidly changing world, such stories provide continuity with the past, while helping us process the anxieties of the present. The longevity of the Teke Teke legend speaks to its effectiveness in addressing primal concerns. As Japan has transformed from a post-war nation rebuilding itself to a technological powerhouse, Teke Teke has remained relevant, evolving to reflect changing societal fears while maintaining its core elements. In a world increasingly dominated by technology and science, legends like Teke Teke remind us that humans still crave supernatural explanations and cautionary tales. They fulfill our need for stories that help us process our fears while providing moral guidance, wrapped in the thrill of a good scare. So the next time you find yourself alone near a train station after dark, and you hear an unusual scraping sound approaching rapidly from behind, what will you do? Will you turn around to face whatever might be there? Or will you run, knowing that some questions are better left unanswered? This has been Whispers in the Dark. I'm your host, Echo, and I hope you'll join me next time as we explore the Red Room Kirsa, deep dive into the internet's deadliest legend. Dare to know more? Visit thedepthcast.com for episode overviews and chilling extras. Until then, sleep well if you can.